Hi, Tom from bkmnutrition.com. Today I want to talk about macros. What is the best macro split for you to lose weight, to lose body fat, to maximize your performance in the gym? Do we need to worry about macros? Are they that important for weight loss or fat loss? And maybe what is the best macro split for you to employ in your diet and training? So firstly, what are macros? So we have macronutrients and micronutrients. Micronutrients, things like vitamins and minerals. Macronutrients are protein, carbs, and fat. And some people talk about alcohol being the fourth macronutrient, but today we're going to talk about protein, carbs, and fats. Now, what's protein used for? Protein's used for building muscle. Most people know it for that. It's also used for immune function, for peptide production, for enzymes in the body. Carbohydrates, people call it a non-essential macronutrient. You don't need carbohydrates. Your body can manufacture carbohydrates and things like protein. However, if you're exercising, it's probably a good idea to have some carbohydrates in your diet. And carbohydrates essentially fuel muscle performance. So when the body takes in carbohydrate, it turns it into glucose, and then that gets turned to glycogen, which goes into your muscles, which then fuels your exercise. And some glycogen is also stored in the liver for release into the blood if you have low blood sugar. So carbohydrates you don't need, but life is a lot easier with them, and you should incorporate them into your diet, in my opinion. Fats are essential for a whole load of body functions, such as maintaining cell membranes, core health, hormones, metabolism, some anti-inflammatory action in the body. There's a lot of listings for fats, so I won't bore you going into all those. So essentially we have protein, carbs, and fats, and they make up the macros which form part of our diet. So if you ever have been given a diet by anybody, you might have been given just macros to follow. Say eat this much protein, this much carbs, this much fat. But are they essential for weight loss? Now, if we look at an overall point of view, when we're looking at weight loss, well, let's talk about fat loss. Really, that's what I talk about. Is fat loss. Weight loss can be a whole load of other things. There's another video on that. But if we're looking for fat loss, which most people are, they're looking to lose body fat and then, as a result of that, lose some weight. Then we need to think about calories first. So it doesn't matter what your macro split is. If your calories are not in a deficit, then you won't lose body fat. Now that's a fact. I won't go into arguing it with people on the internet. It has been proven. And in fact, when they've been looking at different diets, when scientists and researchers have been looking at different diets, such as very low carb, very high fat, very high carb, very low fat, all these combinations, the overwhelming, the 100% result was that whatever diet it was, if the calories were in a deficit, the person lost weight. So there's some minor differences between very low carb, very low fat, that sort of thing. But essentially, if you're in a calorie deficit, it doesn't matter what your macros are, you will lose body fat. However, certain macro splits can help with that. So I know a lot of people talk about, oh, you only have to be in a calorie deficit. Yes, you can eat Haribo's all day and lose weight. Yeah, you can. You can eat McDonald's all day and lose weight. That's been done. You can eat Twinkies all day and lose weight. You can eat ice cream all day and lose weight. All those things have been documented properly, and the people lost weight because they ate less calories and their health markers improved. So let's just go aside from eating junk food is probably not a good thing to do for the long term. However, when these people did that and lost weight, their health markers improved. So not to say that Twinkies and ice cream is a healthy food, but if you lose weight, the result of that will be your health markers, such as markers for cardiovascular disease, cholesterol, blood pressure, all those things will come down as a result of you losing weight. So essentially what we need to think about is not so much, okay, we could eat Haribo's ice cream, McDonald's all day, every day and lose weight. However, you're not going to get much food volume from those things, because those foods tend to be very densely packed with calories, but you don't get a lot of fiber in them, and you don't get a lot of fullness sensation from them. And one of the major issues you're going to face if you're trying to lose weight, lose body fat, is that you want to not feel hungry during the day, because hunger is what drives us to eat. Cravings is what drives us to eat. Interestingly, when a study was done where the people were only given a liquid diet which fulfilled their calories, and they had no different flavors, they lost weight, they had no cravings. But as humans, we don't do that. We actually just eat food all the way through the day. So different foods give us different cravings, and we start to think about different foods that we want to eat. So the major battle you're going to face trying to lose weight or lose body fat is that your hunger is going to be driving you and potentially driving you to come off your diet, cheat on your diet and overeat. So how can we stack the deck in our favor? Well, numerous studies have been done on high protein diets, and high protein diets generally tend to increase your satiety, and by that I mean that they increase your fullness. So protein takes longer to digest than the other macronutrients generally, and if you have a high protein diet, you generally tend to feel fuller for longer. And also protein is lower on the scale of what's called thermic effect of food. So in another video I talk about thermic effect of food, and the thermic effect of food is the amount of calories your body has to put in to get the energy out of the food. So for fats, it's something like 99% energy that you get out of 100 calories. For carbohydrates, it's something like 80 to 90, depending on what carbohydrate it is. And protein generally tends to be 70. Now, what that means is that if you have 100 calories from protein, you're generally only going to get 70 calories out because you've had to put 30 calories in to digest and process and get the food out. Now, some people have taken this to say, oh, protein is a fat-burning food because it has a higher thermic effect of food. That's not correct, because if you're eating 100 calories from protein, you're still getting 70 calories out. So it's not a fat-burning food. It's not going to put you into a deficit by eating protein. However, because the body has to work harder and longer to get the calories out, potentially that if you're eating 2,000 calories on paper from protein, more of that's going to be wasted in terms of digesting it. So that's something to think about, is that when you're looking at your diet, if you have higher protein in it, unless it's on paper that says it's going to be 2,000 calories, if it's a higher proportion of protein in the diet, potentially you're not getting 2,000 calories. But that doesn't mean you should then go and eat more food to make up for it. It's always an estimate, it's always an adjustment. So higher protein diets can help with weight loss or fat loss because they keep you fuller for longer. Now, also, if you think about high protein, high fat diets where carbohydrates have been removed, those diets also generally tend to be, they keep you fuller for longer. Now, I'm not an advocate of keto. I don't like keto or really low carbohydrate diets. I think they have their place in terms of helping with certain conditions, and certainly if you have a medical condition like epilepsy, keto can help with that. But even epileptics who, if they did keto, would be beneficial. They might reduce their seizures. It's so difficult to keep to it that some of these people, even though it's for their health, still incorporate carbohydrates and take the balance on having maybe increased seizures and having to increase the medication, because of the fact that doing a keto diet is so hard. It's not for everybody. And certainly, even if you do a keto diet, you've still got to be in a calorie deficit in order to lose body fat. That's the overriding factor on any diet you do. It has to be one that provides a calorie deficit. So are macros important? Well, not really for fat loss. You just have to eat under your calories. Protein keeps you full. Carbohydrates, I'm a fan or proponent, I should say, of having carbohydrates in your diet unless there's a medical reason. Some diets don't have them in. So if I work with clients for, say, polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, they have to have lower carbohydrates diets because of the demands of their medical condition. But generally, I try and keep carbohydrates into most of my clients' diets. Carbohydrates, they're 4 calories per gram, rather than, say, fats are 9 calories per gram. So the difference there is you can have more carbohydrate in terms of weight than you can fats. Now, if you think about, say, foods that are high in fat, such as avocado, nuts, because of the high calories and fat that you get from them, a handful of nuts of, say, 100 calories is not going to be as much food as, say, a handful of carbs for 100 calories. So again, we're talking about food volume and how much food is going into your stomach, because when we eat, we're hungry, we eat, it goes into our stomach, and the stomach stretches and triggers a peptide that goes up to your brain to say, I am full. Now, on certain people, say obese people, this peptide release is sometimes stalled, which is why they overeat a lot of the time. Whereas if you're a leaner person, generally this signal, and if you exercise and have a healthy lifestyle, this signal is faster. So the more weight you lose, the more sort of efficient your body becomes at sending this signal that we're full. Now, of course, if you've got very high density food that goes into your stomach which doesn't give you that swell and that stretch response, then potentially you can keep eating high calorie foods and not feel full. So you could eat, say, a lot of avocados and not feel full compared to a similar amount of carbohydrate. So you've always got to think about food volume and how much food you're putting into your stomach. So protein generally gives a good stomach strength response and low calories. Carbohydrates such as fibrous veg, which are very low on how many calories you get out of them. So things like spinach, leaves, broccoli, sprouts, all those things you didn't like when you were a kid, and I still don't like sprouts now. All those things are high fiber, so when you eat high fiber foods, they go into your stomach, they swell, so they give you that fullness response, so you get fuller quicker. And this is why people propose to put in more fiber, more veg on their plate. Not so much from a healthy point of view, because you can get all those vitamins and minerals from a pill if you wanted to. It's also about the fiber and the amount of food volume that you're putting in. So always think about trying to incorporate some high fiber green leafy veg into your diet if you can, to pad out your meals. So best macros for weight loss, again, it doesn't really matter as long as you have the calories, but generally when I'm working with clients, we try and keep protein to 1.8 to 2.5 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. Now, for an example, if you're a 100 kilo person, that would be between 180 to 250 grams of protein per day. The higher the protein, potentially the more fuller you're going to feel, but also just remember that the higher you put the protein up, the more calories you're taking off the total calories you got for a day. So if you are say a smaller lady and your calories are limited for the day, you might want to opt for the more 1.8 grams per kilo rather than the 2.5, because that extra amount of protein might eat into, say, the amount of carbohydrates you can have, and you know, you don't want to be limiting yourself too much when you've got limited calories already. Fats, I generally tend to keep to 0.5 grams per kilo up to a maximum of 0.7 grams per kilo. This is for weight loss, this is for fat loss. The reason for that is that 0.5 I found is around about the figure that is good for health, because you need a certain amount of fats in your diet. I ask my clients to supplement with fish oils. I generally don't put in things like oily fish into their diet. The reason for that is that generally most oily fish like salmon and mackerel and stuff is now farmed, so actually the benefits of the omega-3s you get from it is very low in comparison to what you get from the concentrated gelatin capsule. Yeah, you get protein from salmon, but again, you're having protein and fats. It's a very high calorie food for a small amount of food volume. So generally I don't really tend to incorporate salmon in my clients' meals for the fact that it's got fats in. I prefer to get them to have fish oils, which is a much lower calorie load. If they like salmon, that's fine, put it in, but it means they can't have as much, say, potato with their meal. They have to have more fiber, more veg and stuff like that. So fats between 0.5 and 0.7, and then the carbohydrates is made up of whatever's left. So if you say you take let's say we take, say, 2,000 calories that you've got for weight loss. So your maintenance is 2,500 and your calories for fat loss is 2,000. So if we had, let's go for 2.5 grams of protein, and that would give you 1,000 calories, something like that. So it's 250 grams of protein, so that's times by 4 will give 1,000 calories. So you've got to take that off the total. And then if you have fats, so let's say 0.5, they're talking potentially, I don't know, 45 grams of fat, something like that. So then that gives you something like 400 calories you've got to take off, and the rest of the carbohydrates you've got left, that's what you've got to divide up into your meals. So you've got to think about how you're going to balance that out. So you don't want to have too high fats, because you've got to reduce your carbohydrates and potentially reduce your protein, and you want to keep your protein to a level which keeps you full, and also 1.8 grams per kilo is where the optimal amount for muscle building is. So you can keep your muscle while you're dieting. That's really important, because we don't want to lose muscle when we're dieting. If you exercise with weights, as in going to the gym, then I'd highly recommend you try and shift towards more carbohydrates in your diet. Now the reason for this is that when you train with weights, when you do any sort of explosive activity, the fuel that you're going to use for that activity is going to be glycogen. Now glycogen is stored carbohydrates in your muscles, so when you eat carbohydrates, it goes into your stomach, goes to glucose, and then the glucose goes to your muscles, which then gets turned to glycogen. It gets stored in your muscles so that when you exercise in the gym. Now there is a train of thought which a lot of people go for, which is, oh, if I go to the gym and I'm in a low carbohydrate environment, I'm going to burn more fats as a percentage of my energy. Potentially, yes, but actually if you're lifting weights, it's not going to be that. It's going to be carbohydrate, because your body cannot break down fats fast enough to supply the energy it needs to contract the muscles. Something that people don't get, because they don't know about biology maybe, is that you don't burn glycogen, as in you don't burn up, or you don't burn fat as energy. All energy in the body, glycogen, fats, whatever, gets turned into something called ATP, which is your rapid release energy, which the muscles use to contract. Now glycogen converts to ATP very, very quickly, inefficiently, but very, very quickly, whereas fats converts to ATP very, very slowly. So you will not get the energy you need for a hard workout from trying to do very, very low carbohydrate diet and going for more fats. You just won't do it. Your body will still go to glycogen as a predominant energy source. Now what that means is, if you're trying to train with weights and do a lot of explosive HIIT activity, but you're not giving yourself the amount of carbohydrates you need to do that, your potential output in the gym is going to be lower than what you could have done if you had more carbohydrates and dropped some of the fats. Now this is really, really important, because a lot of people think that it's the energy they burn or the fat they burn in the gym, which is body fat, and it isn't. The body fat you burn comes from the calorie deficit you create over the course of the day. The fat that you burn in the gym, or the carbohydrates you burn in the gym, is irrelevant to that, because if you're still in a calorie surplus, it doesn't matter if you burn carbohydrates or fat in the gym, you are not going to burn body fat. So you have to have a calorie deficit, and the way of creating a calorie deficit is either you increase your calories out or you decrease your calories in from food. So if we have more carbohydrates in our workout, we can potentially do more calories out. So we can increase the amount of energy we expend, which then increases the calorie deficit. If you have not a lot of carbohydrates in your diet, your workouts are potentially going to be less productive, potentially expend less energy, so that calories outside of the equation comes down. That's a really important fact to remember. So when you're thinking about if you're exercising in the gym, you should be having carbohydrates in your diet. And keto advocates will say, oh yes, but you become fat adapted and all that sort of stuff. It's irrelevant when you're training with weights, because it's always going to be glycogen. Now your body, yes, can turn protein into carbohydrates, a long process, but then potentially, because it's turning protein into carbohydrates, potentially go into the muscles for that, breaking down muscles in order to make carbohydrate. And that's where you don't want to be if you're trying to lift the weights to build muscle or to maintain muscle. So if you're exercising with weights, doing a lot of HIIT activity, absolutely keep carbohydrates in your diet. If you're a sedentary person, you don't do much exercise, you just do walking or whatever, well, that's fine. Okay, you can go for a keto diet, you can go for very low carbs, higher fats if you want to. That's absolutely fine. But just remember that it's the calorie deficit that creates the fat loss, not the macro split, not the specific macros you've got in there. And having more carbohydrates will give you more energy, explosive energy in the gym. If I was going to advise people on what carbohydrates to blend to have, I would go for a blend of complex carbohydrates and some fruit. So looking at potatoes for complex carbohydrate, potatoes, rice, pasta, if you can tolerate it, it's gluten in, so some people are intolerant to gluten, bread to a certain degree. Now all these are complex carbohydrates, and simple carbohydrates, things like fruit. Now I would incorporate fruit into your diet because it's sweet, it's very tasty, it gives you that sweet sensation. Generally, per food volume is quite low in calories. So like a banana about that size is about 87-ish calories. That's not a lot for the amount of food volume you get. And if you think about things like a punnet of strawberries, about 200 grams of strawberries, is about this much strawberries, that's about 80 calories as well. And if you chop it up into a bowl, it looks like more food. So you actually get more calories per volume than you would say having a chocolate bar or something. So I would always go for some fruit in your diet. It helps you get that sweet sensation that you're always having something nice and almost a treat. And fruit, despite what people say, does not convert to fat very easily in the body. Yeah, chemically it can, but it doesn't actually work that way in the body. And when it's been studied, they studied overload of fruit in the diet, and it was only about something like 1% of the calories that were excess from fruit actually made it to fat. That's minute, that's tiny, compared to if you overeat on fat, which very easily turns to body fat. And the same with carbohydrates generally. The body has to go through a whole load of processes to turn carbohydrates into body fat. It's more likely that if you're in a calorie surplus, the fats in your diet will get turned to body fat before the carbohydrates. The body prefers to put fuel where it's more optimized. So it'll put it into the muscles first, which is why it's important to train with weights, so you get bigger muscles, so you can store more glycogen. So you put the glycogen in the muscles first, the liver second. Then if there's an extra surplus, you tend to do more fidgeting, more moving about. It's what's called neat activity. I've got another video on that. And you tend to move about and do a bit more. Now, if you've got a surplus, yes, it can potentially end up as body fat. But again, when studied, it's not a lot that ends up. It does depend on potentially genetics and your ethnicity and a few other things. But carbohydrates generally don't get stored as fat very easily unless you're having a lot of them and having a lot of simple sugars like Coke and stuff like that, you know. So or loads of Lucozades. Don't have a Lucozade when you go to the gym if you're trying to lose weight. Go for the zero sugar option. A bit on keto. If you watch my videos, follow my content, you know I'm not an advocate of keto. Too many people push it as a miracle, as like this is the fat loss thing. And the way they push it is they say, if you're in keto, you're burning more fat. Now, what they don't say is that that's not body fat, unless you're in a calorie deficit. What happens in keto is, yes, you've got low carbohydrates, so the body has to go for another fuel source, which is fat. So it breaks down fats, puts it through a cycle, and then you get energy out of it. Long process, and you have to be in ketosis to do it. Your brain has to run on ketones. It takes about 7 days to fully get into proper ketosis, and you don't need to do that. But what proponents will say is that if you're having loads of fat, your body will burn more fat. Yes, it will, but it will burn the fat that you're eating, not your body fat, unless you're in a calorie deficit. So just remember that's a really key point, and people will also try and sell you things like keto drinks and keto sticks that you have to weigh on to show you in ketosis, because that then means you're burning body fat. You don't have to be in ketosis to burn body fat, not at all. And actually, interestingly, when the study was done on really high fat volume in the diet, they got something like 4 grams per kilo, which is an immense amount of fat in the diet. It actually shut off fat burning in the body because there was so much fat in the diet. The body didn't need to go to its fat stores. It wasn't required to. It shut off that process. So you're probably never going to get to that level, but it's not just that, you get to that level, shut it off. It'll always be a graduating scale up. So the more fat you're putting in, potentially you're limiting how much body fat you're actually going to burn if you actually get into a calorie deficit. So that's a brief rundown on macros, why they're important, what's important for you. If you are watching this and you're a sedentary person, maybe low carbohydrate, high fat diet might work for you if that's what you prefer eating. If you exercise in the gym, I would not go for very low carb. I would go for a medium carb diet with lower body fat. In all these situations, I would keep protein high, because protein is essential for a lot of functions, as well as keeping and maintaining muscle. And you don't want to drop muscle. You don't want to do that. It's going to slow down, potentially small, your metabolism. And so you don't want to go for low protein. Don't do that. So whatever your situation, pick what works for you. If you have any more questions, because I talked about a lot about figures and stuff like that, put it in the comments. If you want to work out what your potential macros for fat loss and your calories are for fat loss, you can go to my calorie calculator. I'll put a link in the comments. Put your details in, your activity level, and it will give you what I consider to be an optimal split for protein, carbs and fats, and also your calorie deficit amount, so you can stick to that. It's all free. Don't have to give me the money for it. It's just there to help you. If you've got any questions, please put them below, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.